Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for author reading and interaction session with Devaki Jain. And we are going to be discussing her novel, her book, The Brass Notebook today. And we are doing this event in collaboration with the Hedgehog Cafe in Chandigarh and also Speaking Tiger Publishers, who have been very helpful to us in bringing together authors. And before we start the event, I would like to introduce you to Belong and what we are doing at the Library Network. I'm Lasya, I'm the community manager at Belong. And Belong is a social venture that seeks to promote diversity and inclusion in city societies and organizations. And we do this through several services and initiatives that we've started. And these include the Belong Literature Collective, for which we are here today. We also have a Belong Mental Health Collective that curates resources and experts on mental health and the intersection of identity. And we have something called the Belong Circle and Research Collective, which seeks to promote representation of different identities in different fields of expertise. And finally, coming back to the Literature Collective, we have something called the Belong Online Literature Festival, which a lot of you would have joined us earlier for, which we held in July this year. And we have the Belong Library Network, as a part of which you're here today. The Belong Library Network is really a network of right now 22 chapters or cultural spaces across the country, and in 8 different cities. And we seek to harness the power of literature to talk about diversity, inclusion, discrimination, and we basically deal with themes surrounding communities, which could be diverse on the basis of religion, caste, sexuality, ethnicity, race, ability, gender, etc. And we have right now stationed ourselves in about 22 different chapters across 18 cities, like I mentioned. But the goal is to really reach 100 chapters and maybe 50 different cities in far corners of the country by the end of 2021. And each of these library chapters, as we call them, will be spaces where there will be a lending library where people could borrow books on these themes, and also spaces where people can come together, albeit online right now. People can come together and have conversations about different themes of diversity, and maybe in that process promote more compassionate societies. That's really our goal. And today's event is actually in partnership with Hedgehog Cafe and Speaking Tiger, like I mentioned. And for those of you who are joining us from Chandigarh, there is a copy of the Brass Notebook, which we are going to discuss today at the cafe. So if you'd want to lend the book and read the book, you can do that, or you could buy the book from your nearest independent bookstore or online, whatever is more convenient for you. We have with us the author Devaki Jain, and we also have with us Fateh from Hedgehog Cafe. I'll shortly pass the mic to my colleague Yoshita, who will do questionnaire with the author. But I'd also request anybody attending on Zoom to leave your questions for the author, which we will take in a segment around 4:40 on the Q&A box. And for those of you who are joining us on Facebook, if you could please leave your questions on the comments section of the Facebook live stream, we will bring that here ourselves. And I would like Fateh to say a few words before I give the mic to Yoshita. Fateh, if you could unmute yourself and tell us a little bit about Hedgehog and also your relationship with literature and diverse literature. Yeah.
Hi guys, I'm Fateh. I run this book cafe in Chandigarh called the Hedgehog Cafe. We've just finished, it's been 3 years since we launched, and there wasn't any so-called book cafe in Chandigarh earlier. So, and it seemed like the right thing to do. And we've built it up over the years. We have a collection of, say, 6,000 odd books, which not only people can come here and read, but they can also borrow it, in the sense that it's free. I mean, we don't charge anyone for taking those books. We've also done plenty of book launches. We've done lots of book readings here. We've had many open mics. And when Belong kind of, I find we really, the synergies are, just right there with them. We've had open mics and discussions on topics which are very relevant to the times. And so when Belong came out with this, this idea, it really clicked with me. And so here we are. And anyone in Chandigarh, please do come in, have a look. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Fateh. Yoshita, if you can come in and introduce the author and the book and take the session forward. Yeah.
Yes. Hello. Hi. So I'm Yoshita. I'm the Literature Collective Associate at Belongg. So the author for today is Devaki Jain. Devaki Jain is a renowned feminist economist and academician. She graduated in economics and philosophy from St. Anne's College, Oxford, and is an honorary fellow of the college. She is the recipient of the Padma Bhushan and an honorary doctorate from the University of Westville, Durban, South Africa. The book that we are discussing today is Devaki Jain's No Holds Bar memoir, The Brass Notebook, where she recounts her own story and also of an entire nation and a generation that comes into its own. Ma'am, I think you'll be better at describing your book, and please go forward. Thank you a lot for speaking to us today. Hello?
Yes, I can hear you, and I thank you for inviting me and look forward to your comments and things. Yes.
Ma'am, if you could tell us a few words about your book to start off with.
Oh my God. There's a lot of pressure on elderly people that they should write their story. In a way, it's silly. You age and you have some public presence, and they say write your story. So I'm in a way not. It wasn't easy for me to get into it because I didn't know what was my story. Because there are so many people writing about how they were trapped in very traditional places and they escaped from it and arrived in the public domain. Very heroic stories. And somehow I was put off by that, though that's what happens to us when we write from the kind of generations that we come from, that we always write we were in a hole and then we dug ourselves out. So I resisted that. But this Speaking Tiger publisher, Ravi Singh, is such a persuasive young man. He came and said, you must write it. And I signed a contract with you, and I couldn't resist when he said he would edit it. I was told he was one of the best editors in India. So yes, I wrote it. I didn't know what to write, but I started where everybody starts, with my mother and father, my sisters and brothers, the college. It's a very challenging thing to write a story and not try to be like my heroines, like Alice Walker or people like that. You really want to be like that, not write your story, but write the way she wrote. When she wrote that book, she actually was writing about herself, but you didn't see that. So, or like Arundhati. So, with those models in front of me, I felt very squashed. I didn't feel I could write it. But there you had to write it. There was a publisher waiting. So I started where everybody starts, at the beginning, with my parents, with my school, with my college, with my work. So, in a way, it's a like a biodata.
But I think you're being too humble, because I did read your book, the memoir, and I really want to thank you, because most of the time when you see memoirs, it's only written by men, and you mentioned in the beginning yourself that you asked your mother to write down your story, and I thought of how every generation, all like mothers, grandmothers, they pass down their stories to their daughters. You wrote about how your mother passed it down through letters, but none of that is recorded in public history. So really thank you for giving us a glimpse, a very vulnerable and raw glimpse into your life. I think it's really important to have women writing their own stories.
You want to know why the title?
Yeah.
I mean, I've explained it, but I'll explain it again. The stimulus to write your own story is all around us. When you come to an age of 60 or somebody, if you're married and a child, they'll say, write your story. That's become a kind of a silly statement people make. But I did have a chance to meet a woman who's one of the greatest writers in this generation, and she even got a Nobel, Doris Lessing. And I don't know if you read her book, apart from being literally beautiful, they go through all the nuances of social relationships. But of course, I just didn't reach that goal of writing another golden notebook. But I imitated a bit of it by picking up conversations. And then I decided I'll give the name Brass Notebook as a lower species of metal because I'm a lower species of writer compared to Doris. So there's a there's a lot of stuff in the market which puts you off on memoirs. Some classic ones are people who say, I was born poor, but I became my self-made. Others are saying, I did always came first rank in the university. So, showing off that. So how to write it without looking like you're showing yourself off, like a peacock? So that's why I started by describing my mother's childhood, because I found it incredible that my mother, who I saw as a very lively, modern, leading woman who was charming everybody to death, could have had the kind of childhood she had. It fascinated me. Even now, I want to write about that kind of generation of people who came from holes, really. 9-year-old, you get married, and then you arrive 30 years later as an absolutely wonderful socialite, which is what my mother became. So there are these wonderful stories in my heart of that generation who are. So I thought I'd write a little about them. Then, of course, there was pressure from publishers to write about my other life, my public life. So that's how I wrote about a little bit about my engagement with the women's movement. But if you have read the book, you'll find that it goes off into economics, it goes off into what brought me to economics, though I was trained in economics and taught economics. The passion was not so much about the curriculum of economics, but what I found out about women workers. And then, of course, I had a ball. I was so fortunate that in the 80s and 70s, I should have met Julius Nyerere and all these other big names that I've written in my book and get involved in high profile internationalism. And that actually, it should be shameful, but didn't. I learned so much. And because there were very few women in that forum, I also gave so much. I was already into a kind of pro women, must bring up women's, highlight their virtues and their role in economy. So that helped also because people then said, she's a spokesman person for women workers, so call her. So it's a spiral. So one led to the other. And I must say, I feel very contented, though that looks quite vulgar, but I'm really content with the kind of life I had and the kind of exposures I had.
So another fact, in the beginning of your memoir, you delve deeper into your upbringing in an Orthodox Tamil Brahmin family, but also about that time of independence when we were all dealing with modernity as well as, the contradiction between being modern, progressive, and also looking at the past and not letting go of the values. You talk a lot about your father, and you don't shy away um, from congratulating him for his feminist and progressive outlook and letting you travel the world and follow your ambition, but then you also don't shy away from describing his opposition to your intercaste marriage. So would you like to speak more about how the whole contradiction was there in the society as well as how it played out in your personal life?
That generation, I think there are a lot of people who think like that even now, maybe not in the most advanced sections of urban society, but just have to go a little away from these urban centers and you'll find a similar um, bigotry. And you must have seen in the papers the bigotry that we see when somebody just marries. I don't mean Hindu Muslim, that is, of course, higher, but even within caste and subcaste. And there's this whole story written by the Tamil famous writer about just one caste less, even though it was all within the Dalits. and he had to leave his community. There is that kind of um, orthodoxy in Indian society and Indian beliefs. So it is true that he couldn't believe that a Brahmin girl would go and marry a Vaishya, which is 2 castes lower. And it did upset him. But once you have a passion of love, where whatever it is, you just can't but fight for it. So I decided if I lose my family, doesn't matter, but don't lose my man. So it's so clear that that was what I wanted to do. And it's interesting that most of these very orthodox parents and grandparents, ultimately their love for their child is so great that they forgive that sin that we committed and re-embrace us. I didn't know he would do that, but he did that. And then, to his shame, in a way, he said, I'm ashamed of it. He just fell in love with my husband because my husband was one of the most charming, intelligent men, though he may have been 2 castes lower than my caste. And so he became the hero in my father's life. But in the beginning, he just abused him when he went to see him and said, I want to marry your daughter. He said, get out of my room. But my husband was such a fantastic fellow. He didn't let it hurt him in that way that he would abandon me. So we were able to get married and then persuade everybody else that we were good people.
Sure. Yeah, the love comes out really well in your writing.
Yeah. It's a lesson that, I wrote about the difficulties because I feel that your generation now would have all these issues in front of you: intercaste marriage, marrying somebody you meet in your work, not necessarily chosen by your parents, and then also a bit of um, sex experiences which are not necessarily related to marriage. Most of the young women I meet these days, including some of my nieces, they're living with boys whom they met in college. They're not married, and so that's the situation now. But I'm sure their parents are unhappy. So if they read my book and see this woman who looks so orthodox just now with my nose ring and my hair all pinned back, happy woman, that she did the same thing and she's arrived looking very normal. So it may encourage them to let their girls play about a bit.
Yeah. My next question was going to be about this only because it was pretty, you have written very frankly and very unabashedly about your sexuality and embracing pleasure and desire and not seeing it with shame, which is something which is very important for us to understand, and especially women's bodies.
Say that, but there was no question. You made a comment just now, or you had a
No,
question?
yeah, that was the question, but you already answered it. Thank you for that. No, so my next question was about feminism, about how another strand that follows through in the memoir is about how you came about it, how you adopted the word feminism before it was part of a common language. When you got influences from Gloria Steinem or the women around you, or the poor women that you helped through your work. So can you talk a little bit about that?
It was something of an unusual situation. Gloria came to India many years before she became a feminist as a Fulbright student. She was lodged at Miranda House, and I was at that time working for an organization which was doing refugee rehabilitation in Delhi. We were very few bachelor girls in Delhi at that time. I was living alone, but I was working. She had come to Miranda, and visitors who knew her would come to Delhi, and somehow or the other, I met her in a couple of evening parties that were held by people engaged with India's reconstruction. That was the era which I wish you would have lived in. This was the era of the 60s, when young people like I was 23, my husband was 29, the man I married later, they were all engaged in the reconstruction of India after the colonizers left. It was a brilliant time. Cooperatives were being built, institutions were founded. All those big ones that you see now, the theater, the Sangeet Natak Academy, All of that Kamala Devi put together just in the 50s. So imagine being alive and an adult in the 50s when so much was happening around you.
Mm.
So at that time, this woman has come as a Fulbright student, and I met in one of the social activists' drawing room. And both of us were single, both of us were free. That is, I had nobody looking after me. So we decided to meet. And so we constantly met. We went to Chandni Chowk, went to Jama Masjid, we climbed the roofs to fly kites, and we became friends. Then she went back to America via the Pacific route. She got enough money. So when I was coming back from America, where I had gone in 1958 to the Kissinger seminar, she gave me all her contacts, and I came back by that route, return. We were constantly having to have free bed and breakfast. We had no money. So it was always some Hong Kong businessman she stayed with. So I would go and stay with him on my way back. So we became great friends and shared everything we had. Then, of course, she went back to America. And in those days, you didn't have email and phones and so on. So we lost touch. So it was when I saw, as I've written in my book, and I saw her face on the Time magazine, I said, hey, this is a woman I knew. So straight away I got in touch. It so happened I went back to America. And we just couldn't stop talking to each other. So much so we became bonded friends even now. And so I always go and stay with her for 2 months. When she comes to India, she stays with me. That is not because she's a famous person now, but because we were friends when we were your age. And we, of course, we are committed to the same thing, women's empowerment, recognizing women's values. And so it became a friendship like any other good friendship. I think she would admit that to some extent her Indian experience helped her. And I would admit that I learned a great deal in the beginning about what feminism was all about. And I'll tell you one story which I hope will make you laugh. So I came back from, I went to visit America for this and that. One time in 76 or something, I came back and I said, this feminism is a very interesting thing. We must invite Gloria Steinem to Delhi because she had some cause. So Aruna Asaf Ali, who was the leader of the Marxist organization NFIW, National Foundation of Indian Women, and Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, they were all the leaders of women's organizations. They said, rubbish, feminism is an awful word. What is it all about? Anti-men. So they said, no, don't invite her. Anti-men, she's supposed to have burned bras, which is all, little mythologies that came up. So it was very hostile at that time to use the word feminism. And I can't help but laugh now when I find that feminism is being used by all of you. Yet in the 80s, 90s, it was a bit touch me not. It was as if we had got some American plague in us. So it's good to see that people are now using the word without that stigma.
Mm.
But in that era, the socialist ethic was so strong, uh, underpinned by communism, that anything American was considered ugly and crude. In a way, it was also. So, but so feminism also was seen as burning bras. That's all that Kamala Devi could have. They're burning bras. I said, no, Kamala Devi. It's about women's empowerment. No, no, don't use that word here. Like that it was. So that's the friendship and that's the bonding. And I think we are both very old now. She's my age. We're both 87. But she's alive and I'm alive. We talk to each other. But the threads of communication and using each other's skills has stopped. I feel that we in India have defined our own feminism, our own women's movement, and I shed any kind of exemplar model of American feminism. I have become very affirmative about my identity. When I say my, I mean Indian identity. So I sort of separated myself from the American feminist movement a bit.
You have also, like you mentioned about Indian feminism, you have also focused a lot on decolonization, about us having our own theories or perspectives of the South, of countries from the South, economics, on poverty, on development, on feminism. So would you like to comment on how what the current models, are we still relying a lot on the colonial lens, or are we making our own?
I'm sorry to tell you that we have got worse now. I think this hunger for foreign direct investment, which many countries who were former colonies are suffering that hunger, has sort of weakened our capacity for looking inwards to our own strengths and drawing from it. So obviously, if you were investing in my company, you'd want me to do what is your view of what should be produced.
Mm.
So it's a great degeneration of the kind of political courage we had up to the late 80s, beginning of 90s, that we thought we could create our own model of economic progress. But we've lost out. We are now a part of a particle in a whirling world of capitalism, of the kind that, I mean, not all capitalism can be destructive, but this one is very harsh on women. It's very harsh on the less privileged. Um, it is also definitely promoting inequality in a very big way, as Thomas Piketty has shown. India is one of the worst. So it bleeds. It makes my heart bleed to think that in a country where there are millions of people who are really desperately hungry, really poor in the worst way that you can be poor, we should have six of our people come under the first 10 richest people in the world in the Fortune magazine. Can you imagine? Six Indians, Fortune magazine's billionaire list. It just shames me. It shames me in two ways. One is that we should have that kind of situation. Two, that my generation, which was trying to play a role in designing India's regeneration after colonization, failed to put that idea on the ground. We caught. Either we would be deeply socialist or we'd be deeply capitalist. We couldn't find the way that we could be ourselves. And it's not only India. Many other colonies have got surrendered to this model, which is hurting equality. So it's a sad story.
Yeah. Hopefully, we find a way to reconcile in coming generations or sometime. Hopefully.
Your generation can do something. I have great faith in the
Yeah.
Indian women's movement. I feel that you're the future. I've written about it. It's everywhere. When I went to Harvard to
Mm.
lecture last year, I said it's these women who will recreate the India of my dreams.
We hope so. We also, yeah, so that brings me to the question of how well you have dealt with molestation and workplace harassment also in your memoir. The fact that I really admired was how matter of factly you wrote it, because it's such a normalized part of every woman's life that it is like really haunting to see it. It is really haunting to see it in a way that is not playing it out as a fact, as not a fact of life, because that is something that we all face. So how would you illustrate the contrast in like the reception you got in sharing these episodes before the Me Too movement, and right now, do you think we are going towards a better future?
I couldn't, because of this internet problem, your diction is not coming clearly to me. So
Okay,
could you just repeat
sorry.
that question? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm saying, so you also dealt with workplace harassment and molestation in your memoir. And I was saying how you described it very matter of factly, because it's such a normalized part of every woman's life. What do you think? Have you seen a difference in reception of your sharing of your story of harassment before and after the Me Too movement?
No, unfortunately, that problem that I described has come to stay. There may be efforts like, the Seva organization unionizes some women, but the large section of women workers, whether they're, and tea workers and are unionized, BD workers are something of a union, but the large section of women workers who are doing pre-processing and producing things which are sold in the informal market have no strength at all to insist on any kind of wage regulation. And the most awful stories that we hear of put out work by the multinationals just makes you feel ashamed, because why would a very poor woman accept such poor terms of a contract where she works herself into dust and gets very little, because that's the bread line for her family? But why is that happening? That's because our state and people like you and me are not getting engaged in organizing them and enabling them to fight for their rights. There are some people who are heroines. I have a friend called Nalini Naik in Trivandrum. She's a heroine because she organizes the fishers, she organizes domestic workers, nurses. She's all the time into organizing and ensuring that a collective strength will negotiate better terms. But that's few and far between. There are so many women who are working their lives to dirt, who are earning very little. And that has not changed in India, because the additional burden that now an activist like you would face when you try to do that is that the multinationals and the other big, shall I say, capitalists of India need that for their profit. And so they're not going to easily, and even these people who are being exploited, they'll probably say, go away, don't unionize that, then we'll get into trouble. You know the stories that happened in Chhattisgarh when others tried to organize the mine workers against the Tatars. That young man was actually killed. So it's a very dangerous situation when you try to organize exploited workers against very powerful industries or economic entities. You may be killed. So it's a bad situation in terms of the economic profile of India and who is owning what right now. So the chances for women to improve themselves would depend on your generation, how you plunge into unionization. I think there's nothing as important as collective strength, whether it's the Anganwadi workers, the nurses whom you see struggling now, or women workers in the informal sector. I wish more NGOs would go into unionizing workers rather than only speaking about sexuality and those things. The economic landscape should be taken care of by feminist organizations much more deeply. But I think whatever little I know is that they're mostly interested in sexuality and things like that, which is the case. But this is a much more devastating case, this impoverishment, in my view.
Um, yeah. So you also talk about counting correctly. That's what you have taught us in the memoir also, about how bias plays out when we statistically or we collect data. So can you talk a little bit more about that, about for our audience who have not read the book, about how bias plays out when you collect data or when you see only statistics?
Yes, let me give what is called a vivid example. We are When I talk of counting correctly, remember the space to which I'm talking is the National Sample Survey Organization. This is a government organization, which is the instrument that government uses, and we all use academics for statistics. They do an employment survey every 5 years, and that's the base for there are other surveys that are done. You must have seen the latest one on national health and nutrition and all the ones. So in this one is where I call it the word basketing. You basket those who are workers, and that is valuable for the person to be identified as a worker, because if you are identified as a worker, then you can access labor rights, wages, things like that. Now, in that survey, the methodology is such that you ask, I come to you and ask, do you belong to any of these codes? And I have 92 codes. Like, do you bake bread? Do you cut grass? Do you dig wells? Like that. In the 92 codes, you might say yes, no. If you say yes, then you come into what is called the labor force. If you say no, you're not in the labor force. So what happens to women is they say no, 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 because they are not in any of those formal ones. So then you put them in the basket saying they're not workers. That's code 93. So by looking at it almost like a surgeon looks at the nerve system of a body, I found that that's a trap. That when you ask a woman, what do you do? And ask her, do you build a bridge? Do you do bricks? She says, no, 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 no. Then you say that she doesn't any worker. But if you had asked her, what did you do? Instead of putting it against an occupation, you say, what did you do for the last day? She may say, oh, I threshed grass or I dug weeds. Then she's a worker. So we were trying to influence the NSA so that counting correctly means that you're not counting correctly. So people, if you ask them and say, out of these 92 codes, which one do you belong to? Say, no, I don't belong to any of that. But if you say, what did you do for half a day every day? She said, I was threshing. Then threshing is an economic activity. So then she comes into working force. She comes into workforce and the hopes are that she can get all the workers' advantages. So the exclusion of women from the number called work participation rate is because of the failure of the questionnaire to recognize how to capture or to draw in the work of women, which may not be easy for even the women. It's the women themselves to make the fault, to say, no, I don't do any of these. So people have started asking probing questions. But my suggestion was that they should ask the woman, not does she belong to any of these 92 codes? What did you do for half day every day for the last 1 week? When she'll tell you something, then capture her. Say she's a worker.
Yeah. We invisibilize a lot of labor too of women
Pardon?
everywhere. We invisibilize also a lot of labor of women everywhere. That's also something that you have pointed out, and like it's a great thing that you have. So I just want to say, like you begin your memoir with a fantastic quote: "A woman can walk miles without taking one single step forward." And I just want to say, as a young feminist, I would like to thank you for all your work, struggle, and rebellion, and miles that you have walked to make our paths much easier. So, yeah.
Thank you.
The counting.
Sorry.
Now, would you like to maybe read some excerpt from your memoir, or tell us of an anecdote that you would like to pick from all the personalities that you interacted in your memoir with because of your kind of amazing life?
I'll give you one anecdote which I love, but I don't think you have time for more. One of the most wonderful leaders I worked with, perhaps the most from my perception, is Julius Nyerere. He was the president of Tanzania and then he retired. Then he became the chairman of the South Commission. And so we traveled with him all over the world, China, Cuba. So one got a chance to see him in planes, in hotels, in meetings. He always, many times in his speeches and his introduction to the agenda of the South Commission, he would always refer to his mother, almost as if to say, my mother said this as if it was the most important thing to say. So once or twice when the opening inaugural session of the Sound Commission, which is a kind of big deal, Geneva Palace, every ambassador was there. We all felt we were like big thing. He starts by saying, my mother said to me, so everybody said, who's this man? Black man talking about his mother, because the white countries think that we are all really kooky. When the South Commission's work was over, he called all of us, his commissioners as he called them, And he said, you tell me what would you like? I want to give each of you a gift of something you want to do. So everybody said, we want to go to the Serengeti or whatever, that big game park is in Tanzania. So I said, I want to meet your mother because he was such an important presence in his mind, not only in his body. He would quote her for everything. So that was the most wonderful thing. He invited me to his village and I spent 10 days in his village. And he had about 23 mothers because his father married many times and many children. So he took me to his mother. She didn't like it at all. She had a blanket on her body. She thought, why is he bringing this woman inside? I tried to make friends with her. No way. But that was, to my mind, the exciting thing because, you have a mother who's naked and only covers herself with blanket. One of 23 wives of this patriarch in the village. And then you become a world leader, the president of a country, and then somebody that everybody admires. When we went to Cuba, Fidel acted as if Nyerere was his hero. Went to China, he was a hero. All over that world, he was a hero. Who was he? He was the son of this village where his father had married 23 times. And he used to tell me that he had no clothes to go to school. So his father cut his trousers and made a half pant for him. So that kind of person coming into what he became and then still referring to his mother was for me very exciting. And that was the greatest thing that I would like to remember.
Thank you for sharing that. Now we have a lot of questions coming in from the audience as well. So
Yeah. So I have
Lasya would like to
curated some. Yeah. Do you have? Is there something else left, or can we just go to questions, Yoshita?
No, I think we can go to questions, right, Matt?
Okay. Yeah. So we have some questions that have come in from Facebook and also some questions here. I'd also like to encourage the attendees here and also on Facebook to leave your questions in the Q&A chat box here, where you can see there's on the bottommost right side. And the first question is actually something that's actually, I have a question. This is my question, and also somebody from Facebook called Arun has asked this question in maybe slightly different terms. My part of the question would be, hearing you speak was really like taking a walk through the history of feminism in India, and it was delightful because it was mostly like a first person narrative, and I wanted to understand what are the parallels, at least nine.
You had a question. No, but I can't see. Did she articulate the question? Yeah, sorry.
Sorry.
You tell me.
Yeah, so nothing. We will actually read out the questions to you. You don't have to see them yourself. Yeah, if that's a confusion. So my first question for you would be, what was the parallel that you saw in, say, post 1950, the history of the shape feminism took in India and also in the USA? Because obviously they're not similar. So what is a parallel and what is a primary difference you think the feminist movement in India and the US is?
I don't see a difference, but the generation, the elders in that generation at the end of the 20th, 19th century or whatever century saw a difference. But if you really look at it, there's no difference. We were the collective assertion of our ideas, of our presence, of our dignity is what you people, your young generation is doing as feminism. You want to establish your identity, your power, and your autonomy. That's all that they are trying. I think there's not much difference. The other thing that we do, which many of the less intellectual organizations are doing, is to organize women into collectives. And in a way, when Gloria described to me what she started by doing, it was just getting a community of women to sit together and talk about what was bugging them. And she said that the first example she got of what is called collective consciousness was that they all identified the same thing. The bus stop for children was not near enough. So then straight away, they could appeal to have the bus stop made nearer. It looks so trivial, but that is collective strength, and that was women's decision or need. So like that, there are starting from basic needs, which are like creche or a bus stop or a less uh, stressful working hours, you can go to bigger things like rights, choice, getting into position, all that can happen. But it was always women's grouping and collective power.
Yeah.
So whether it's collective power coming from America or collective power coming from Africa, you as a feminist will understand that we want to show that we have a domain and we want to expand that domain, and we are doing it as not only women but LGBTQ. It can go across all the gender types.
All right. Thank you so much. There's actually two questions from Arun G on Facebook. And these are kind of related to the questions that I asked you and some of the topics that you spoke about. One of the questions is, what is the change that you see over a period of time in the women's movement or the feminist movement in India? And the follow-up question to that you could consider is, that he would like to get some insight into the usage of public spaces and discussion in the feminist movement in the earlier times in India. How did public spaces play a role? Yeah.
In the second question's location, I want to know. They're asking what? That did we also use public spaces or did they?
Yeah, wants to get question. Can we please give me more insight into public spaces? And I think the person wants to know how, like, right now we use social media. What kind of public spaces were used and to actually organize the feminist movement over a period of time through the years?
Okay. Let me finish the last one first because I've forgotten the first one that you asked. What was the first one?
The first one was just a basic question on what is the major change that you see in the women's movement in India over a period of time. It's basically like one of those what are the waves that you've seen kind of question. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's one of the biggest changes is it's grown this way and that way, that is horizontally and vertically. I think there was just few large national organizations and a lot of small ones. And there was a certain bit of clash between the big ones and the small ones. But now, my God, I say you people, but that because it includes young people, but I think it's widespread in India. And I think you only have to go to any place where you see a sense of women's solidarity. So I think that's a very big difference, that the idea of women, the gender difference, and that they have a right to speak and ask for what they think is what they need or what they wish or what they advise, has widened enormously. But the sad part, which I must say, because I think you people have the time before you to do that, is that that particular space and that the vigor has not entered conventional politics. You're not in parliament, you're not in the legislative assembly. We have 1/3 reservation in Panchayati Raj institutions. They are really very smart women, but you are not accumulating their power, to not reaching out to them and saying, come on, let me make a pyramid of all the women who are elected to Panchayat Raj and go like a cannonball into the parliament or legislative assembly saying this is what women want. Not at all. That visibility and the presence in political space, which is necessary, is not happening. It's outside the political space, it's outside the economic space. And to some extent, it's got deeper and deeper into our bodies and not so much into our minds. I mean, we are now much more engaged with sexuality and things like that. But what about the other domain in which we want the power of women to speak? So that's not, in my view, that needs to be done. And who am I to say that? That is just a reflection, that's all, not an advice.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. We actually have some very interesting questions from Amrita, and I would like to start off with asking you about. So she says feminism introduced as a branch of economics, that is feminist economics, was rather late and very recent in terms of it being a branch of economic research. When did you start using feminism in your economic research?
I'm not competent to answer that because Now there are women who define themselves as feminist economists. And I go to all the Feminist Economic Association meetings in Glasgow, in Delhi. There's an International Association of Feminist Economists, as you know, called IFA. I have not been able to grasp, in spite of attending so many of them, what is feminist economics. Um, Maybe I'm old fashioned, maybe I'm more interested in change, maybe, but there is gendered economics. There is a great demand for gendering data and also for making the gendering worthwhile. It's not just enough to put male, female. It's, it's a characteristic, not just a sexual label. The characteristics of women's mind, the characteristics of women's public participation, how to harvest that into economics, how to make feminist economics speak about women's economics. I maybe it's happened, but I haven't seen that happen. So the answer to your question for me is that feminist economics is a very important entry into academia, and hopefully it will have an effect. But gender economics is a different thing, that is just making sure that gender is included in the budget and things like that. But there is need for women who have understood women's economy to construct a kind of proposal which, for example, the finance minister should consider not just budgeting. Now the fashion is gender budgeting, put more money into where women are needing it. To my mind, that is trivial. To my mind, the intellect should be to transform economic reasoning itself, to learn from what women are doing and where women are placed in the economy, and transform economic reasoning, not only economic doling out of more money or less money. So it's a challenge, and it has to, and I maybe I'm ignorant in the sense I'm not reading so much these days. I'm not going to conferences these days. So I don't know what's happening, but I don't see it. For example, now Nirmala Sitaram is doing the budget. People will go and ask her for women, but they'll ask for more money for women. Ye karna, wo karna. But they're not saying, look, your economic reasoning, your concept of what was going to change is not worthwhile, and explaining why feminist economics says that's not worthwhile. It's a different ballpark, as you can see. One is mang, and I find asking very, very humiliating.
All right. Thank you so much for that, and also so gracefully telling us, telling us about the difference between gender economics and feminist economics as well. There's the next question from Amrita is: you have been a part of many committees and planning boards as an academic. What advice would you give someone who aspires to be on those committees in the future? And then they add that when I go across some old planning reports, are very few women.
That's true. Planning boards in all over India, the state planning boards hardly had any women. The Karnataka State Planning Board was unusual. It had me for 8 years. And that was because one of the civil servants who was the planning secretary was herself burning with feminism, though she was an IAS officer. So we are so dependent on the bureaucracy for us to be included in any structure. It isn't a political decision, it's usually a bureaucrat who decides. And then if the chief minister has some favorite men, then he brings them in. So I often wonder why your generation doesn't also lobby for more space in such structures. I think by and large, your generation, I shouldn't say your generation, but those who are now active, are not really caring to be part of governance. They feel that the governments are all not only patriarchal, but rather conservative and not. They don't really, they just go when the budget is being made and said, all this should be done. But they don't jump into it. Now look at the parliament, very few women, except for Moira. No one really talks about women. So I'm not answering your question properly. What I'm saying is, to get to the state board, planning board, you have to have some political presence. by and large, they want a woman who is a Dalit or a minority. They're not interested in others. But if the Dalit or the minority doesn't have equipment, something which justifies their inclusion, they won't do that. So it's true, we really need to push for more women to be included in governance. Excuse me. भैया आ जाओ, बहुत ठंड हो रहा है, बंद कर दो, शीशा बंद कर दो, कोई बात नहीं, पानी मत डालना, हवा ठंड आ रहा है. Sorry for that.
No problem.
Somebody opened the window and it's cold.
Yeah, it is very understandable. Yeah. Please go ahead. Sorry.
So done?
Yeah. Could we, do you want me to, yeah, I'll just go to the next one. Could you recommend some of your favorite academic research papers written under feminist economics?
I'm trying to think. One of my favorite feminist economists is Diane Elson, who works out of Essex and who's received many awards. Another, I don't know whether she calls herself a feminist economist, is Jayathi Ghosh, who opens a lot of doors on economic reasoning, on budget. You know, she's probably one of the few who is like a man in terms of commenting on economic policy. In terms of theorizing, one of my favorite women feminist economists, a woman called Nancy Folbray, who many decades ago opened the household. And she fight with each other saying, who did first? I say, I'm the one who first opened the household and showed inequality within the household and how the household operates. She says, no, she is the first one. But she's known for household economics. And I wish I was as famous as she was. She is. You know, there are so many women in India who belong to the Feminist Economics Club. And I know they'll be hurt if I didn't mention all their names. But I don't want to mention any one as a taller than the other because that goes against my feminist ethic. We are a collective of feminist economists who operate in Delhi as a group, about 23 or 30 of us. And that kind of thing is also happening, I think, in some of the states, I'm not sure. But I don't want to single anyone out of those. Because I have a sense that what is feminist economics is it's a question for, even I ask myself. Is it just gender economics? Is it looking at economics and changing it to be more just, that is towards equality? Is it economics which pays more attention to the real economic agents of India, that is women workers in the informal sector, and get them a better deal? So if you believe that feminist economics is something that has to do that, bring more economic justice into the world, then you don't have to go into theories and other constructs that feminist economists these days are doing. So I'm not very good on answering that question.
Okay. Thank you so much. And also thank you for the suggestions that you did give us. And there's one question from Raj. We also have one question from Binu, but it's a more blanket question, which I would keep for the end. We have one question coming in from Rajshri. They say, do you think a secular power center would treat its women better?
Your mouth, sorry.
Sorry. Okay, sorry. I'm going back to this. How do you see the question? The essence of the question is, how do you see secularism and feminism working together? Yeah. And she says, they say, sorry for the pronouns, and they add that, pardon me if the question itself is a blunder, but how do you see secularism and feminism working together?
Secularism?
Yeah.
Did you say secularism?
Secularism, yeah. Do you think a secular power center would treat its women better or differently? And how do you see secularism and feminism working together? Yeah, that's the question.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I belong to the generation who felt that the idea of secularism was a fantastic platform for India with its multiple religions and its habit of coping with that. I mean, one of the loveliest things that my generation saw, which probably your generation hasn't seen, is festivals of different religions happening on streets in various parts of India without any fury or
Yeah.
hostility. It was just like, I used to say India is the most tolerant country in the world because you could tolerate everything. You
Yeah.
tolerate naked men walking on the street, you tolerate every form of sexuality, you tolerate religious functions, and you just go with it. But it's changed. I mean, it's become much sharper.
Yeah.
So definitely I'm a support secularism, that is the ism which says that either you have it one definition which is that all religions are to be tolerated, or you go to an extreme and say that I don't belong to any religion because I don't believe in any religion. That's also possible.
Yeah.
Maybe I belong to the second set, that I have no religious label on my head. So that way, putting secularism in the constitution was very wise because it was creating tolerance,
Yeah.
which I think is so critical in a multiple religion country like us.
Hmm.
You go to Latin America, it's all Christian and Roman Catholic, so there's not much conflict.
Hmm.
But here there is so many religions that if once we allow one religion to dominate as we are now allowing, there is going to be great conflict.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the question was also, how do you see secularism and feminism playing together? Uh, that was.
Well, if you define feminism, I've written something about this recently in a philosophy magazine in the US. I don't ask all of you to believe in this definition, but I have removed the notion of feminism away from just women. I've said feminism is a theory of justice. I've taken it away from women, men, that it wants to put on the ground justice. So justice then is for everyone, men, women. I like that, and I'm very happy to tell you that a young African economist has written a book, which I wish I could remember her name, Sylvia Tambale, I think. She has also defined feminism in that broader way of accommodating. Justice also is an accommodating word. It is you accommodate people. So broadening it away from women's bodies to something more conceptual, something more legal.
Hmm.
So I like that. I like to remove it from our bodies into our minds, and our minds to be just. And if feminism can be justice, then here we have a huge, wonderful journey for people of your generation to fight for justice. It could be for Dalits, it could be for Muslims, it could be for women of different sexualities. Such a broad, wonderful sky under which we can work justice.
Yeah, that sounds beautiful. I'd also like to add that I don't know the generational gap you're describing, that, but I have actually grown up in cities where I have seen two festivals, Ganesh Chaturthi and Ramzan, being celebrated together. Like, I come from Hyderabad, so I do have that romantic, nostalgic notion of secularism that once existed. But maybe I don't know how far I can say the same thing about um, generation today, or like something is people that grew up after 95, 2000, or something like that. But yeah, it definitely seems nostalgic at this stage. I think at every stage when you look at it, it seems that way. uh, we have one last question from Binu, actually, and this is more of a blanket envelope question to a lot of conversations that we've had today, or a lot of existing conversations around the idea of around the Indian idea of feminism, or how to take this forward. It is, what do you think we should do differently, personally, to bring up our sons and daughters to resist the patriarchal state of mind, which seems to be ingrained in our society and refuses to go away?
that last part of the question, you swallowed it.
Okay. So I will just repeat the whole question. It
Yeah.
says, what do you think we should do? We should be doing differently as we bring up our sons and daughters to resist the patriarchal state of mind, which seems to be ingrained in our society and refuses to go away.
What seems to be ingrained in our society? The kind of
I think I think they mean patriarchal state, like the concept of patriarchy itself. Yeah.
what to say. I mean, I've recently seen, as you have also seen, the terrible harassment that a Hindu girl went because she married a Muslim, or a Muslim girl when she. It's the TV fortunately shows some of those atrocities. So in a situation like that, what do you say? Uh, in a way, if young feminist organizations like yours um, could spread a message which encourages people to speak out, to fight. But the trouble is, if you're in a village and you're fighting your father and mother and marrying a man from another caste or religion, the man that you love could be killed. So often the lovers are killed. So you have to step 2 steps back. So it's a bad situation. And I cannot see a single solution coming up, but support from your groups, feminist organizations, women's movement, much more deep into village India, not being so urban and not being so sophisticated. But the kind of work that people like Durgabai Deshmukh and others did was putting their hands into the belly of India, that is.
Mm.
People very rarely nowadays go and live in a conflicted, given religious conflict driven village. Many
Mhm.
people like you, and try to create a certain atmosphere of not only tolerance but showing that it's possible, it should be done. So there's
Mhm.
not much of that, and maybe I don't know, but I think there's not much of our tentacles going to the heartland of Orthodox India. Secondly, have you noticed we are not there at all in the political space?
Mhm.
Yesterday in Karnataka, there was a fight over caste. Where are the women? We are not there. So I've been thinking for the last 40 years that we must enter the political game, even though we don't like the parties. And I think there's a small group of women who found themselves for women in engagement in politics, but they couldn't get into any of the elections
Yeah.
because elections cost so much money. But there is that particular thing that we haven't been able to cross, which is to get itself into formal politics, to be able to influence. Now we have women in Panchayati Raj, that is formal politics. But how many of your organizations go and sit there for a year with, say, one panchayat in UP, and the women, elected women, talk to them, see what they think, use them for our, we don't. That panchayat women have not been recognized by the modern feminist movement, I think. But if I'm wrong, you must tell me.
No, I completely agree with you. And I think that actually holds true for a lot of other modern feminist movements like Me Too. I think we discussed earlier today that like how far are we going with those movements, right? Like are we crossing the urban centers? Hardly. So thank you so much actually for patiently answering all our questions. We had Rajshri here on chat tell us thank you for bringing you, and she says such a vibrant, genuine and inspiring woman. And I think we all agree, being here and speaking with you today. It was wonderful, warm and delightful to have you. It just seemed like a great walk down the history, like I mentioned earlier. I'd actually now request Yoshita, if she's around, and also Fateh, to say if they have any parting few words, and Devki ma'am, to you also, if you want to share any parting words with us. Yeah. Whoever would like to go first, and then we can do the wrap up. Yeah.
I would just like to thank you for, first of all, writing the memoir. And I think You're being humble. The memoir for us young people is something very, very, very important. For have our icons write their own stories, their own struggles, their own vulnerabilities, and thank you also for doing all the work that paved our ways too. And we hope we can also contribute our efforts in making future generations of feminism better and more economically inclusive in every way.
I'd just like to thank Devika. Wonderful hearing her. In-depth, stuff which probably never thought of before. I received the book day before. I'll be reading it now. Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone at Belongg, Yoshita, you, Sonia, Lasya, making this possible, and hoping to do more of these going forward.
Thank you so much.
So nice to have your compliments and to have your interest. That makes me feel very good. Yeah.
Thank you.
I wish I was younger. I would come to Chandigarh and sit in your bookshop.
Please do. I mean, you're young. You're probably younger than us in so many ways.
In the bookshops in Shankar and Khan Market, they'll say, "Oh, yes, we know this old woman." Because, but nowadays my mobility, apart from the fact that we are under an emergency with this disease, or this COVID, but just mobility. Not that I still, God's grace, I still can walk. I don't need a wheelchair, but it is a very difficult now for me to travel and run around like I used to. So wish you all the best for your bookshop.
Thank you so much. Nonetheless,
Tell
look forward.
them to buy that. That is a passionate book. It's an inspiring book.
Definitely. And we should thank Speaking Tiger for Tanu and Renuka for bringing this together for us. It was wonderful.
Yes.
Ma'am, I also just wanted to say, so I'm a part of Team Belong. I also work here, and I've been listening to the whole conversation with like goosebumps because I was so inspired, especially when you talked about how you hope that the women of today will recreate the India of your dreams. And I was telling my friends this also while you were talking, and everybody was like, "We hope we won't let you down." And so really thank you so much. I look forward to reading the book, and this conversation was incredible. I'm very touched.
Yeah. We're
Thank
going
you.
to go back
That's
and
the
play.
message for you. You have to take all this passion that you might feel today and go down to the villages and get
Yes,
elected women in Punjab.
absolutely.
There's so much disdain for them. I don't want to mention names of some of your academic heroes. They say, "Oh, Devki, they're all led by men and they're just puppets there," which is true. The men put their wives for the reservation seat and then they twist their tail. But if you keep on pushing that, like you push rights of the LGBTQ and other things where you're like your watchdogs, and get at least one panchayat women to talk to you to, and then move them from being subordinate to the men to being something else. Enough. That would be a gift
Yeah.
to me. Because we really have
Yeah,
to change the scenario down there. We're all like, I'm so free, but I wonder how many women of my age are.
exactly. There's no freedom until everybody is free. Yeah.
So you
Thank you.
become free in your lifetime, and I'll be looking somewhere.
Yeah. Ma'am, would you like to say anything before we end the session?
So I would like to say that I really enjoyed this session, and I thank you for inviting me. And I found the questions were helpful to me also. So in all your work, which you described to me, like all elders, I wish you well. And I would like also if it's possible at all, for a little more engagement with this political rights at the grassroots level. I think I really would have liked in my lifetime to see a change. But there was a time when we fought and we had a number of very strong feminists in parliament. That was the Janata time. They came from Bombay and UP and all that. But after that, parliament and legislative assemblies in the country don't have women. They have one woman, but not necessarily a woman who fights for women. There's such a big weakness If you had them, you have no idea how much we can do with them.
Yeah.
No
We
idea.
actually have Amrita in the chat who just says, do let her know that now that there are some organizations that are working towards bringing women and LGBTQ people into politics, let her know that we are here, and let her know that we won't let her down.
What? I
She
understand. I know that you brought LGBT people into
Yeah, she says, let her know that we won't let her down.
politics. Thank you so much. So die in peace.
Thank you so much for sharing as much as you did, ma'am. We would love to have you collaborate with you in the future. We would love to invite you to our literature festival also that we will do in 2021. And just a few things I would like to say before we part today is that we are having a author interaction session, author and translator interaction session with poet Salma and Kalyan Raman tomorrow. And we're going to discuss the book, The Curse. Again, another Speaking Tiger publication. And we would love for you to join it. You can check out the links and registration links on our social media channels. You can follow Hedgehog on social media and also follow us to see our future updates. You can also log on to belonglibrary.com to see our events and our chapters. And it would be great if you can join your local libraries in your cities or somewhere around. Though right now we are primarily doing online events because of the virus. We hope to hopefully once we are vaccinated, move away from this and form communities. And all these chapters will also shortly have books that you can borrow and read. The Brass Notebook is already at Hedgehog Cafe in Chandigarh. So if anybody in Chandigarh watching this wants to borrow the book, you can definitely do that. Fateh is actually holding the book up. I'm going to unmute you. Yeah, so that you, Fateh is actually, so that you are become, Fateh, if you can unmute yourself, you will come on the screen to
Yeah, I
show the
did.
book.
Yeah. This
Yeah,
book is here. It's going to be lying on our top shelf, and we'll make a couple of posts about this so people get to know it's available here for borrowing. After I've read it,
after you read it, yes.
I'll take a day.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you, Devaki ma'am. It was great speaking with you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.